Good morning, children. Uh, Today I am going to talk to you uh, about this new political science chapter, which is called as federalism. Before I go ahead and start teaching you about the new chapter, let us go back to the previous chapter of power sharing and try to understand what we studied over there. We studied two examples which we studied over there. One of the example was Belgium and the other was of Sri Lanka. If you remember, in Belgium, there were accommodative measures adopted after the constitutional amendment in 1993, and because of that, powers from the central government were given to the regional governments. Though the majority was of the Dutch, but the Dutch saw to it that at the central level, the Dutch and the French speaking ministers would be equal, so that in Brussels, where the majority was of the French, they would uh, they also saw to it that the Dutch and the French ministers would be equal. So thereby, because of that, the problems will not be there, and one state or region will not be dominated just because it was a minority. So therefore, powers of central government were given to the regional governments, and regional governments were now not dependent on the central government. And as I said that, even in Brussels, both the communities had equal representation. So what happened was there was shift in Belgium from a unitary where a single rule is there to a federal form of government where there are not only one central government but different components are or constituents are there. This detail of unitary and federal I'll be talking in my chapter later on. On the other side, we saw that there were certain majoritarian measures which were adopted in Sri Lanka, whereby all the domination was there of the Sinhalese and problems were being faced by the Tamilians. And because of these tensions between the Sinhalese and the Tamilians, it led to a unitary form of government where the national government had all the power. So, this was the major thing. Along with this, in the previous chapter, you have also studied about various forms of power sharing. You studied about power sharing among different organs of the government, if you remember, that is between executive, legislature, and judiciary. Then you studied about power among governments at different levels. And then you studied about power sharing among different social groups. And lastly, you studied about power sharing arrangement between political parties, pressure groups, and movements. Now, before I start the next chapter, the second form of power sharing is what is very crucial because this is what we are going to study in the second chapter of federalism, where the government is there for the entire country, which is consisting of the government for the entire country as well as the government at the provincial or the regional levels. So all this comprising of the for the entire country as well as for the provincial or regional level is the which is there, which is called as federalism, which comprises of center, union, or the federal government. It is also called as the federal government or vertical form of power sharing. Most importantly, there are different levels. So, these levels which are there are in terms of center, which is or the union, then which has the maximum control. Then we have the state uh, or the regional or provincial level, and finally we have the local, that is consisting of municipalities and panchayats. So this division of power between the higher and the lower levels of government is what is going to be studied in the chapter federalism. So, coming to our chapter, federalism, we are going to study what is federalism, difference between unitary and federal form of government, the key features of federalism, types of federation, what makes India a federal country, uh, how is federalism practiced, and decentralization of power. So, as we start this new chapter, first of all, we have to understand what does federalism mean. Federalism, students, this is not the definition, but it's a general term which has been explained that federalism is basically derived from a Latin word foedus, which means an agreement or a compact. And this agreement which is there is when the power is divided between a central authority and various constituent units of the country. As you saw in the previous diagram which I had shown, that there is the center, the central or the union. So that is your central authority. And various constituents are the other components which are there. So these constituents are your initially there was only state, but later on another level was also added, that is the local, which, as I told you, consisted of the municipalities and panchayats. So this is a very important definition in terms of federalism. So basically, federation has two levels of government, one which is for the entire country, but it is responsible for subjects of common national interest. Common national interest are subjects which are, say, which is for the whole nation. So it could be related to your defense, foreign affairs, banking, and then they which are of national interest. And then there is a government at the state level which is looking after the day-to-day administration of that state, which would be looking into your police, trade, agriculture. Right? So both these levels of government enjoy power independent of each other. In an ideal form, it is very nicely said that they are independent and enjoy equal power, but the reality is definitely the central authority has more powers than the other constituent units. But yes, we always say that they enjoy power independent of each other. Now, coming to your next topic, we are going to understand the difference between a unitary and a federal form of government. Now, in a unitary form of government, as you saw in Sri Lanka, there is only one level of government, or the subunits are subordinate to the central government. You saw that whether they were the Tamilians or others who were there, they were all subordinate to the central government, which was consisting of the Sinhalese. Whereas in a federal government, state governments have their own powers and are not answerable to the central government. So they are not answerable to the central government because they have their own powers. Secondly, central government can pass an order to the provincial or local government. So whatever the center government says has to be obeyed by the provinces or the local governments. And central power in federal government cannot order the state governments. And the countries which are there, you see over here in this map, which is already there in your textbook, you have a federal form of government in Canada, you have it in Russia, you have it in India, you have it in Australia and many other countries. Whereas a unitary form of government, you have it in Japan, China. In China, you have it. Then you have it in England. You have it in France. So these are places where you have a unitary form of government as it is. So these are the examples which are already mentioned. So you have understood that in a unitary form of government, the one level of government is which is there, it is subordinate to the central government, and whatever center government says, it has to be obeyed by the local or the provincial level governments. Whereas in a federal government, the central government cannot order the state governments, and the state governments are not answerable to the central government. So these two questions are very important, which you will have to learn. One is what is federalism, and secondly, we have studied about difference between unitary and federal government. Now coming to the next topic, we are talking a very major topic which we are now starting are the key features of federalism. Now, first of all, we have already, from the beginning, I have been talking that there are two or more levels or tiers of government. You have already studied, that is the, so many times I have been saying the union level, the state level, as well as the local level. So initially there were two, and later on other levels of government can be there. Now, second point is different tiers of government govern the same citizens, but each tier has its own jurisdiction in specific matters of legislation, taxation, and administration. What does it mean is, children, we break up this point into two things. First of all, it says is different tiers of government govern the same citizen. For example, the name of the citizen is A, and the citizen is residing in Gujarat. So he is a citizen of Gujarat, as well as he is a citizen of the country also. So these levels of government, they are controlling over this one citizen A who is living in the state, as well as he is a member of the country. But each tier has its own jurisdiction. Jurisdiction means, as it is mentioned in your textbook, is the area of legal authority in terms of what is your control in terms of geography, or it can be in control in terms of certain subjects. Subjects, children, as always means in terms of areas. For example, in the initial only I told you that is subjects of national importance like defense, foreign affairs, or which are of state, that is police, trade, which we'll be talking about later on. So where, what is his control, or where the control lies for this person A in terms of who will, in matters of legislation. Legislation means for making laws for this person, for who is living, a person A who may be living in Gujarat, but what are the laws which he has to obey, and where, or which, how are the taxes which he has to pay. For example, the income tax. For income tax, he will have to pay to the center, or if it is a property tax, he will have to pay to the state, or if it is in terms of his agricultural income, or for related to land, building, electricity, he will have to pay to the state. So the, in terms of taxation, the jurisdiction is mentioned, and so also the administration. Clear to you? So this one citizen, it has been told, very clearly mentioned, that where all, which all, how the government uh, uh, will be concerned relating to his laws, the taxation, as well as the administration. Now, the third point says the jurisdiction of each level of governments are specified in the constitution. When the framers of our constitution were making the constitution, they very clearly mentioned ours is a written constitution. So it has been clearly mentioned that what is the jurisdiction of each level. For example, that has been mentioned, okay, who is going to collect which tax, what are the taxes which will be collected. Later on, amendments have been made, but basically it has told that what is the jurisdiction of each level for the state as well as for the center. So, the existence and authority of each tier of government is constitutionally guaranteed. So, because it is mentioned in the constitution, which is a written constitution, so it will not happen that one level, for example, the union level, or that the central level tries to exert more power on the states, so, or more authority, because it has already been constitutionally guaranteed that what will come under what. Next point says, the fourth point says, the fundamental provisions of the Constitution cannot be changed unilaterally, which means that if you want to bring about changes in the Constitution, it cannot be changed unilaterally, means it cannot be changed by one side only, by one level of the government only. So if you want to bring out changes, you will have to take the majority of both the houses of the parliament, and sometimes you will have to consult the judges also. So it is not something which can be unilaterally changed, because you want to bring about a change, that is, you are able to bring about a change, right? So you need approvals of the states also. So such a change requires both the levels of the government, because this is very important, because the 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 framers of the constitution had the foresight to see that one level of the government does not try to overpower. So therefore they saw to it that if any change has to be required, it needs the agreement or the consent of the states also. Now, the next point says courts have the power to interpret the constitution and the powers of different levels of the government. This is a very important thing, and this I can try to explain it to you from the last chapter. You remember when we were studying about the different organs of the government, they said that executives were the ones who were appointing the judges. But at the same time, the judges saw to it that the executive power was not taken away to that extent that sometimes the judges could pass a judgment whereby the executive would not cross their limit. So the courts have the power to interpret the constitution and the powers of different levels of the government. And in case there is any dispute which is there, then they act as a judge between different levels of the government in their exercise of their respective power. So whenever the conflict is there, they try to act as judgment. If you, I mean, you all are a little young for all this, but if you read more, you will see that at the time when the Mrs. Indira Gandhi, during the time of 1973, when she was trying to exert so much of power on to the states. So at that time, sometimes the states or people from the state, they would approach the courts, and courts have then given judgment which have gone in favor of the public of the states rather than in favor of the center. So these, because of that, the many times the judgments which were passed in favor of the public, because every person has the fundamental right to approach the courts in case of any negligence which is there from one level of the government. Then the next point says sources of revenue of each level of government are clearly specified. See, children, any country cannot survive only with on its own. So even center or state, they need money or revenue to survive. So from where do they get the revenue? So that they have financial autonomy or independence is clearly mentioned, as I was talking to you. That is, from where do the money from the, if you pay the income tax, where does it go? If you're paying the property tax, where does the income go? So all this is clearly specified so that every level has financial independence. Autonomy means independence. And the last key feature is the federal system has dual objectives: to safeguard and promote unity of the country, which is very important. That, for example, in a diverse country like India, for example, some people are living in, say, Mizoram, somebody is living in Tamil Nadu, somebody is living in, say, Himachal Pradesh. So, in order to promote all this unity and country remains united and it is not divided, it is very important that we accommodate all the regional diversity of the public, of the people, because a country like India, which is having diverse religion, culture, not even ethnicity, but yes, different cultures. So it is very important that it is looked into. So these 7 key features, please learn them as they are. This is a very important question which is often asked in the boards, and a common question that is in terms of key features. So if it is very nice if you would by heart and write it down in the notebook and relearn and rewrite again and again. Now, one last thing which we'll do today for the day before we stop for the day and then move to the next lecture is the crucial aspects. So, for the crucial aspects for the practice of federalism are two major crucial aspects are there. That is, government at different levels should agree. Most importantly, the government should agree to rules of power sharing. Unless and until all the center, state, and local bodies agree that there is something like a power sharing arrangement, and they should trust that each one will abide or go by that agreement and will not break the agreement. So they need to trust that these rules are followed of practicing the rules of power sharing. And so therefore, if we have these two aspects, that is of mutual trust and agreement to live together, then only the real federal structure will be followed in the country. So we need to trust each other and agree to live with each other comfortably. Then only we will be able to uh, accommodate and live peacefully. So today I'm winding up for the day for this lecture, and when we come back again, I'll be talking about the other aspects of federalism.